I'd like to start by saying welcome to today's panel and thanks for joining the discussion today on Beyond Controls, Exploring Cyber Innovation. My name is Myron Malia-Dare. I'm a corporate lawyer at Miller Thomson in Toronto with significant experience in the technology sector. My practice, I advise on domestic and international M&A, venture capital, and complex technology transactions, particularly relating to cybersecurity, AI, and fintech. And it's really focused on this topic too. I'm also a strategic advisor to the Canadian RegTech Association. For those of you who don't know, the CRTA is a not-for-profit organization focused on solving regulatory challenges through collaborative efforts between key RegTech stakeholders, such as regulated entities, technology vendors, regulatory bodies, and government and professional service providers. So I'm excited to bring you today's discussion, which is extremely topical based on the current climate. For organizations, cybersecurity has never been more critical as we see new and novel cyber threats emerge, and also the pace of regulatory change has increased to a rapid level these days. We've seen traditional organizations in certain regulated sectors, such as financial services, such as banks as well, and insurance brokers, transition into more technology companies than ever before, and data-driven industries have proliferated, and we've seen the growth in these sectors too. As such, really the need for organizations to dedicate more resources to combat cyber risk and develop cyber resilience is even greater than ever. Yeah, the focus of today's talk is to look at the standards and frameworks we use in cybersecurity controls in place, and understand whether these are the most effective tool available, or if they're double-edged swords in that they don't really support innovation in themselves, and you can become a bit too closed off in your approach to dealing with cyber risk. For today's talk, we have the pleasure of being with us today two very renowned speakers with a lot of expertise in the area of cyber innovation who can help guide and kick off the conversation today. So I'd first like to introduce AJ Khan. AJ is the CEO and founder of Cyber Strategize Inc. and is a leader in cyber innovation and entrepreneurship. He has 20 years of cybersecurity experience, as well as an MBA in innovation and entrepreneurship. He currently has multiple cyber startups and is actively involved in enabling cybersecurity in new industries, such as connected and autonomous vehicles, Industry 4.0, and smart cities as well. AJ is also a frequent contributor with global regulatory bodies involved in enabling cybersecurity, including Transport Canada, the EU Information Security Agency, and many others. Also joining us today is Philippe Lafrance. He is a standards manager at the ISARA, where he works with standards development organizations across the globe, including the ETSI and NIST, to help standards for post-quantum cryptography and related areas of information security. Originally from Winnipeg, Manitoba, Philip holds a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Waterloo in Ontario, where he studied post-quantum cryptography. So as you heard from there, we have two very distinguished individuals in this area. So I think today is going to be a great conversation. So let's start off with a quick discussion and a bit of an overview of what we mean by cyber innovation and how this differs from the more traditional standards approach. So AJ, maybe you can kick us off with a bit of an overview of what we're talking about when we say cyber innovation and how it differs.
Yes, and thanks for this invite. It's great to be on this webinar with CRTA. I do feel that CRTA is really doing a great job by pushing out this message about cyber innovation, because cyber innovation is something quite unique, which we need to look at from a wider societal perspective and also from an organizational perspective, because we are in the age of the connected world. And in the connected world, if we don't have cybersecurity enabled, our business, our organizations, our whole life gets impacted. The question is, how can we make sure that we not only secure our networks and our computers and our systems, but we use cybersecurity to enable our business to thrive in today's connected environment. And that is what cybersecurity innovation is all about. And the challenge which is right now with most cyber focused SMEs is that cyber is all about controlling risk, but innovation is all about enabling risk and taking risk and making sure we have new cyber innovation technologies, processes, and procedures. And that's what we are looking at from the cyber innovation perspective.
That's very interesting. No, thanks for that, AJ. I think that's a good summary of it too as well. Philip, is there anything you want to add to that?
Oh, very much so. Hi, everyone. My name is Philip. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm really looking forward to this conversation today. Yeah, so succinctly, innovation really just means doing something in a better way. When you really boil it down, that's what it means. Not necessarily arbitrarily different, but something that actually gives you an increased value, gives you a benefit. And when we think about cyber innovation, really what we mean is enabling an organization to be innovative within the various domains of cybersecurity. So enabling that cybersecurity posture across the organization and across industries and improving it over time. And with regards to the question about standards, so as you mentioned, I'm the standards manager here at Icera. Every day of my life are about standards. Personally, I love standards. I enjoy them. I understand maybe not everybody does, but they're absolutely critical to the success of any security program. I mean, you're really just not going to be able to do it at scale over time without using standards. The problem is, and you mentioned them being a double-edged sword. I would love to continue that conversation with you at some point. They're probably more like 8 or 16 edged swords when you really break it down. But standards by themselves are not a complete solution, especially when the standards or baselines or frameworks you're trying to adhere to lean a bit more in the direction of technical controls. And technical controls are great, but they sort of miss out on some of the other aspects that feed into a holistic cybersecurity program. So this approach, the cyber innovative approach, is meant to be complementary to the use of standards. It's meant to enhance and augment their effect in a sort of more holistic approach. If I could add one more thing on that, it may be a little bit corny, but one of the things I've been thinking about is, well, you can innovate on products, you can innovate on processes, and you can either do these incrementally or they can be radical innovations. But you can also innovate on your culture and your mindset of cybersecurity within industries and organizations. And for me personally, I think it's that innovation on the culture that really needs to be the focus right now. I think collectively, we need to modernize how we think about cybersecurity.
The next question I'd like to pose to both yourself, AJ, and Philip is, what common cyber challenges have you seen across verticals? So not just in the fintech and financial services and in the regtech sphere, but also in other industries where companies who are maybe a bit more associated with financial services wouldn't be as aware of, but we can learn from, because I'm sure there are parallels. Maybe Phil, you can start that off.
I love this question. It's a great question. It's an important question. I don't think we have time to give it the justice it deserves, but I'll certainly list a few things that come to mind when you think of common challenges across different verticals. First thing that I think of is scalability. So you think about over the past few years, the just exponential amount of new IoT devices, for example, that organizations are bringing in. And these things are not always necessarily being managed very well or recorded, or sometimes you don't even know who configured them. It's not your IT department who configured them. It was somebody from accounting who thought this was a neat little tool that would help them with their work. You've heard these stories of casinos getting hacked through internet-enabled fish tanks. So as organizations scale up with new technologies, being safe with that technology, I think is a really common problem. Another thing that comes to mind, of course, is protections against emerging technologies and disruptive technologies. Sometimes people can get a little caught off guard from these things. And the example that I think of coming from the quantum safe cryptography background is, well, how will large-scale quantum computers affect the security of your organization? And this is something that every organization on any vertical that uses cybersecurity needs to consider at some point. Carrying on, I would say disintegration of the network perimeter is a really common problem. You have increased BYOD policies, increased amounts of remote work, people moving more towards zero trust architectures, lower and lower barriers of entry for attackers. On one hand, we see attacks are getting more sophisticated, more damaging, but on the other hand, some of them are also getting easier to execute. Some script kiddie type attacks, some social engineering attacks. And as that barrier gets lower and lower, we need to be prepared to defend against that. One more actually really important one, I would say, a little bit disturbing one, is sunsetting outdated, obsolete tools and equipment in cryptography. Just succinctly, I'll say, please stop using SHA-1 or the data encryption standard. And one more, if you'll indulge me, is the alignment between the cyber and the non-cyber factions within an organization. I think we've all seen there's sometimes a little bit of maybe unproductive tension between those two things. And hey, by working together better, you can get better stuff done. And I think that's a common problem that needs to be overcome. And again, that speaks to this change in the culture and the mindset I talked about earlier.
I do want to mention one other challenge, which is the suppliers of cybersecurity in your organization. You have to trust them, but at the same time, you have to make sure that they are enabled to secure you from zero-day threats, from other breaches, from impact of cybersecurity violations, and having a robust and secure cybersecurity supply chain is essential for your organization. So that is something which is we are still lacking. We have to look into that. And when we explore that cybersecurity supply chain, the question becomes, how long does it take your organization to enable a new cybersecurity tool in your organization and use it effectively? Usually the timeline I've seen is 3 years, but zero-day threats are yesterday. So how do you actually bridge that gap?
Yeah, no, I think there's many facets to this, and managing third parties is a bigger piece here, and learning from that too. Okay, so we'll move on to the next topic here. So I'll pose this right to you, AJ. We'll stay with you here. What are some of the biggest threats you see that will not be addressed by traditional approaches to cybersecurity, and how would these be better addressed by cyber innovation? So really the question here is what benefit will organizations get by changing their focus?
The way we look at it is that there are controls in place, there are frameworks in place for making an organization secure. There are so many standards, ISO 27001, GDPR, NIST. But as Philip said, those standards are focused on the control side, on the protection side, where cyber innovation is really critical to the success of your organization. Is it changes the mindset, it changes the culture, and it makes sure that you're focusing on how to use cyber innovation for the success of your organization. So I'll give you an example here. If there is an organization which is enabling new cybersecurity processes and new cybersecurity tools in the organization, maybe it is creating startups inside the organization. Maybe it has got cyberpreneurs inside the organization, and they will actually ultimately lead to a better cybersecurity profile of that organization. And in today's world, you have to have that strong profile, not only because of protecting yourself from hackers, but also because you don't want to have impact on, for example, your reputational risk. So those kind of things is what cyber innovation is all about.
Cyber innovation itself, is it suitable for all companies, or is there a company or a stage in a company's development or growth cycle where it makes the most sense, and maybe providing some user cases of companies who would see the most benefit from adopting this more cyber innovation approach? Phil, maybe you can start.
Yeah, that's a great question. And, if you let me be a nerd for a moment, like I haven't been already, only a Sith speaks in absolutes. So I'm not willing to say that every organization will get tremendous benefit from this, but I feel like it's pretty widely and generally applicable. if your organization uses a computer, even if it's offline, it still needs to worry about cybersecurity to some extent. And once you need to worry about cybersecurity, you have an opportunity for cyber innovation. And so, yeah, you might think absolutely that maybe different verticals, different organizations, as you said, at different stages of their development might get differing amounts of benefit. But that's, again, one of the really, really nice things about this approach is it gives you benefits across a wider range of areas, as opposed to just increasing your ability to mitigate security incidents. So AJ said this before, we can realize reputational and societal benefits by being a leader in cyber innovation, by advancing this program and this type of thought. You can realize competitive advantages by keeping your finger on the pulse and being able to pivot and adapt to change, potentially before other firms, because you're following this innovative approach. And in general, you can realize efficiencies and savings across the organizations by following these processes. And so in general, that's applicable to a very wide range of organizations. And specifically, you're asking about, who? Well, I would say organizations that are more heavily in the technology space, spaces that are maybe more susceptible to disruption or frequent changes in the underlying technology. And I would also say organizations that are trying to scale. There's the business side that needs to scale if you're scaling your organization, but the cybersecurity program needs to move with it. And these things tend to kind of get disjointed from each other. And so by bringing it all together, we can scale them together. And I think there's major potential for benefit there.
I think Philip said a few very interesting things on the benefits of cyber innovation now and how an organization can utilize that and build upon it. So when I see cyber innovation, I see it applicable to all companies out there because it changes their DNA. In their DNA needs to be more cyber focused, the culture needs to change. But when you are looking at it from an innovation perspective, and as I mentioned earlier, cybersecurity is all about risk management, and most cybersecurity SMEs are risk averse. But then you have to ask the question, why? So whenever you're doing a cybersecurity project or in your organization, you're enabling cybersecurity, even let's say at the C level, and you're asking those questions, why can't we do it in a better way? What benefits will it provide us if we enable more innovation in the cybersecurity department? Can we look at it from an organizational wide perspective? From maybe there are new business revenue streams if you enable cybersecurity in your business. Maybe there are potential for business spin-offs from a cybersecurity perspective. And I'm not talking about smaller or larger companies. I have seen startups who've started focusing on one area of cyber, and then they thought that they could benefit from other areas. I've seen larger enterprises who were not in the cybersecurity field in itself. They were enabling cybersecurity, and the processes they enabled, they were consulting other entities in their industry from their best practices in cyber. So there's a lot of cross-pollination here, and which ultimately helps your organization from a business revenue perspective, but more importantly, from a business survival perspective, even because in today's world, if you're hacked and you have a reputation risk, reputation loss, then even there's potential of going out of business. So I think every organization needs to step up, and not only organization, but I think as a society, we have to step up and make sure that we are focused on cyber, not only from a control perspective, but more from an innovation perspective.
We've covered what cyber innovation is. We've looked at some of the use cases. We've dug into the most applicable use cases as well, and where it's applicable to be used. I think it's now a good time maybe to delve a bit more into the cybersecurity innovation leadership framework that both of you have been championing here as well. So I'll start off by just asking what drove you to develop the framework, and what gaps did you see in the industry and the market? We've touched on some of these, but maybe delving in a bit more, what gaps you saw with the traditional approach that led you to develop the innovation framework? And we'll
So
start. AJ, go ahead, please.
yeah, so the traditional approach to cybersecurity and like all the frameworks which are out there, uh, they all focus on technical control. So that what we saw was the challenge, and the controls are applicable, they are relevant. I do a lot of work, for example, on payment card industry. I do a lot of work on ISO 27000. Those controls are very relevant for the technical aspect of any cybersecurity implementation. But where they lack is integrating cybersecurity controls to the business, to looking at it from new revenue perspective, to looking at it from how the business would suffer if there's cybersecurity impact. So that was the background which brought us to look into cybersecurity. Philip has a unique background with so much understanding of standards. And I went to Philip and I had a conversation with him on how can we actually look at enabling a framework around cyber innovation. And that's where the conversation started. And it's been a very interesting journey during the last 1 year or so.
One of the critical pieces which I'd ask you both to turn your mind to is what buy-in do you require from key stakeholders for an organization that's maybe looking to implement a more innovative approach to cybersecurity? Who really needs to be at the table for this decision and discussions, and who in an organization should be leading this change? So AJ, maybe you can start.
So when you look at our framework, we have 5 levels, and the third level is when you have a CISO already in the organization and various cybersecurity frameworks enabled. So that is level 3. Beyond level 3, we start focusing on innovation, and we have an cyber innovation steering committee. So who needs to be on that steering committee? Definitely your CISO, your cybersecurity owner. But then you need stakeholders from other parts of the business who are or would be enabling innovation. These could be someone from the business side. This could be someone from the finance side. This could be someone, maybe you already have an innovation department in organization, so someone from there. So that steering committee is the driver of cybersecurity innovation, and it needs to have adequate authority. It needs to have ownership of driving cyber innovation, and it needs to have the resources and the mandate to ensure that it happens.
It's really not an easy question to say this is just the one individual driving this. I think it's what I'm taking from this is buy-in from various stakeholders of the organization. So the next question I would have too is as well, because I know the cybersecurity innovation framework speaks to really 4 domains, which is innovation, which would be the technology, processes, people, and leadership. So I'm curious how, and this really builds on the discussion on stakeholders, but how interconnected are these domains? And Phil, maybe you can kick off a bit of an overview of that and speak to that point.
I would say borderline inextricably. They're tightly linked. In particular, the first 3, so technology, processes, people, and culture, these are really tied closely together and feed into each other. And the leadership stake is what enables this whole thing. And it really depends on where you are in what we call your journey. The highest scores in the framework on the leadership side of things are going to occur once you get to the higher levels. You need that executive buy-in to start this thing. It needs to be a top-down led approach. It can't just be, done by some man in the middle. Sorry for the cryptography pun. It needs to have that executive buy-in. And so I mentioned earlier that we have these different domains, and actions in those different domains feed into each other. So one way of looking at this is that the leadership sets the goal, sets the vision. The people and culture are the things that carry out that vision and work towards, achieving the goals. And the processes and the technology are the vehicles we ride to get there. So they're all linked together. They all rely on each other in some ways, and they feed back and forth between each other.
Yeah, so quite interconnected is what I'm taking from that as well. So that's very useful too. And I think really moving on from the discussion about the areas of cyber innovation, I think one of the key issues or concerns organization has is addressing and adopting processes and procedures that really allow for stricter and allow for compliance, sorry, with stricter data protection and privacy laws. There's obviously a big push to protect personal information, and what personal information is ever changing under different laws in different jurisdictions. Really, does cyber innovation though help organizations meet these obligations? I know in some cases having rules and a framework in place in some ways, you at least know what you have to do to comply in those worlds. But when we're thinking of in the process of highly regulated industries and particularly with data protection, how does cyber innovation as a concept help organizations meet these obligations? AJ, maybe we can start with you for this one.
Yes, as we said, the Cyber Innovation Leadership Framework is complementary to existing standards, and those standards are, in various jurisdictions, whatever the standards are applicable. Where cyber innovation helps in that is ensuring that those standards, first of all, are implemented and then they are maintained, because the organization has a cyber innovation mindset. So if the organization understands cybersecurity and have cyber innovation inbuilt into their DNA, whatever new framework there is, they will be able to implement it. Usually implementing a framework is challenging, as Philip pointed out earlier. These frameworks are very detailed, but from our perspective, if you're looking at cyber innovation as a whole, then you are looking at, for example, your cyber innovation goals. If you're That's under people and culture in the previous slide. If your cyber innovation goal is implementing ISO 27001 or implementing PCI DSS, that could be an innovation goal. And how do you enable that? So that's the cultural shift. So you can actually define implementation of cybersecurity technologies, frameworks, standards, and even education programs as your cyber innovation goals, and then take steps to enable those controls.
I do have one final question though for the panelists today, and this is really for those other attendees today, not the two, but everyone else who is maybe in an organization who's listened to the conversation today and thought, wow, how can my organization look to implement cyber innovation into their operations, but maybe you're unsure about how to start. So maybe you can give us a bit of an overview about first steps organizations should take, and really to jump into this. So Phil, why don't you lead this one off?
But it just starts with having conversations. Talk to the people in your organization, talk to the people who could give buy-in for this sort of program. And if you need to, start small. Put it in a segmented part of the organization, test it out, expand it, see how it works, and tailor it for your organization and your needs, and then roll it out over time.
Yeah, a couple of things. One is you should start looking at design thinking. How do you apply design thinking to cyber innovation? So that's a very interesting area to be in. The other thing, from a practical point of view, as Philip said, you can download the framework, but one interesting thing about the framework is there is a self-assessment questionnaire in there. So you can actually go there, do the self-assessment questionnaire, and score yourself.
Do you have any examples of how you have used design thinking with a client? So I'd open that up to either of you who'd like to take that one.
So I can take it. I can tell you from an automotive sector perspective. Automotive is a sector where the automotive SMEs don't know cyber, and the cyber SMEs don't know automotive. So just learning about that is a challenge. So design thinking becomes hugely important. You have to do ideation, you have to do various activities where you are looking at maybe journey maps, things like that, to ensure what is the cybersecurity experience around a vehicle, for example. But maybe it's not a vehicle. What about the factory itself? What about the plant itself? So um, that particular experience where you bring in different expertise, cyber, automotive, maybe there are other expertise, and you use the design thinking process to actually ensure new cybersecurity processes, policies, implementations are designed from scratch. I think that's a great example of cyber innovation.
I'm going to turn another question here from the audience here how do you see the cyber innovation leadership framework working with the enterprise risk framework? So again, it's open to either of you to respond. Please let me know who has thoughts on that.
I think the enterprise risk framework captures a major area of what we are looking at. If you see our 20 um, 20 areas of cyber innovation, enterprise risk management would be capturing many of them. I would say maybe half of them. But the question becomes, when you're looking at enterprise risk management, are you looking at things like what are your cyber innovation goals? Are you looking at things like the evangelism on cyber innovation? So what is the content being created for cyber innovation? Are there discussions going on? Is there whiteboarding happening around that? And you can look at enterprise risk management not only from cyber risk, but you maybe monetary risk is there, physical security risk, other financial risk. Obviously, when you go through a detailed enterprise risk management process, you have to look at all those different risks. But again, the question becomes, where are the opportunities for innovation when you're enabling that risk management process?
Okay, yeah. So last question from the audience here. It relates to regulated entities. It seems that a defensive cybersecurity mindset is the preeminent approach today. Are there signs of banks being at the edge of innovation, or are there other industries where there are organizations leading in the areas of innovation that banks and FIs can learn from? So maybe Philip, you'd like to start on that one?
Yeah, that's a great question. Banks or financial institutions in general, or those involved in financial services, I almost see it as being this quantum superposition, where they are maybe a bit slow and methodical to change and evolve. But there is, as I'm seeing for sure, this strong desire to be innovative today, especially with, as I said earlier, these new technologies constantly coming out. I work with a couple groups that do financial standards, in particular on the cryptography side with our neighbors in the South. And once new paradigms start creeping in and these standards development organizations become aware of them, the first thing that tends to happen is a survey paper or a technical report gets put out that just lays out the landscape. What is the problem? How's it going to impact us? What are the general things we need to be aware of? And then after that, starts getting into the more specifics about, okay, what happens with this algorithm in this use case? What's going on with this PKI? Should it be set up like that? And I'm seeing in a few different areas, so blockchain, AI, lots and lots and lots in quantum computing. I'm seeing a lot of banks and financial entities involved in the financial industry really being innovative on that side. And as to the second part of your question, I mean, just in general, I would say learn from everyone. I don't know if I would say there's a particular industry that is head and shoulders above being, innovative in ways that banks should maybe try to learn from or imitate. But you're seeing just innovation across many industries. And I think part of it is taking a step back and looking across the board and picking pieces from each of those different verticals and bringing them together.
So just wanted to add to that. Banks have a unique opportunity in the cyber innovation leadership framework, because if you look at the leadership domain, uh, that is cyber evangelism, that is cyber startup incubation, sponsorship of cyber innovation, and advancement of cyber regulation. So those the banks can actually take that role and enable this kind of cyber innovation. They're already on the level 3 of the journey map on cyber innovation because they have strong cybersecurity controls. The next step is looking at it from an innovation perspective and enabling leadership in that area. So I do feel that banks can actually enable cyber innovation. And when you look at it compared to other industries, they are already, because of the nature of their business, they already have very strong cyber control. So that helps them.
Yeah, and another thing I would add on that is we're seeing more and more large organizations trying to enable this move to what's called zero trust architectures. And one of the kind of interesting things about that is if you're moving to this new sort of paradigm of security, you got to think about how are your tools that you previously had going to work in that new paradigm, or if you're going to make the expense to move to this new thing, am I going to buy a tool now that's going to be obsolete when I move forward? And so personally, I'm seeing a lot of thought in how to do this in an innovative way. How do we move to the zero trust in a stable, phased way, while also defending against new technologies, extending the lifetimes of things that we're currently using, and finding other venues, technologies, and processes that work in this new system.